I just want to say thank you for not going to work tomorrow, because it seems like everyone else went home for work. And I think your priorities are pretty straight. To stay here and party. Because once I'm done with this, I'll be able to actually meet all of you. I've been locked in my hotel room, sweating with Kate, Beam, and Bert, and smelling our armpits. And it's just not a good scene. If you can't tell, I'm extremely nervous. I don't like being on stage, but I said yes anyways, because I tend to do things that I probably shouldn't do. But I am just, I'm flattered to be here and to be on stage literally with other people. And with so many amazing designers that I've known before the conference, independent of the internet, like Chuck Anderson and Ted Carpenter and James White, the renegade designer. And of course meeting Johnny Cupcakes. And I just love Friends of Type. I think they're amazing. I'm simply just not gifted when it comes to typography and lettering. Even though I'm a designer, it seems like a pretty fundamental thing you should know something about. But I refuse to tell the difference between DIN, Helvetica, and Universe. I don't see it at all. I think they're pretty much identical. Actually, that isn't even Universe, it's Tahoma. So I'm pretty much hopeless. I apologize to all my design professors since I've graduated. I guess the big takeaway that I've heard in most of the speeches is to do something that makes you happy. And it seems to me, I was sitting at Kate's booth earlier in the art gallery, that everyone here are makers. Everyone here feels very passionately about their work to the point where they produce books and stickers and badges, and I think it's amazing that you guys make these kinds of products that you can buy and then keep. Because I just make balloon animals for the New York Times, and then you throw it away the next day. So there's like no permanence to what I do at all. I love showing this piece because it was the first thing I got published in the Times, and my father, whenever someone asks him what his daughter does, he takes this out and he says, I paid for 4 years of art school. And this is what she does. And so I worked at the New York Times for about 6 years, filling in for art directors when they were sick or pregnant. And I quickly gained a reputation for being a conceptual illustrator who could fix something in a pinch. And so I have to say that if you were an illustrator, I highly recommend interning for art directors, because I was surrounded by them in the art department, and they hired me just because I was there. Like, I just showed up. And by showing up to work, I got more work. And the Times production cycle is pretty rigorous. Generally when I first get an assignment, I feel overwhelmed with panic. And I feel very stressed out. Most of it's unnecessary, but it can be a great motivational tool when working on deadline. And so I convinced myself that this sketch, what I'm working on, is going to be my best work yet. And then as the deadline is fast approaching, my optimism, it deteriorates, and unembarrassing is just good enough for me before I sign it off. But this rushing with the deadlines, whether it's a 3-hour deadline or an 8-hour deadline or the luxury of a 12-hour deadline, it turns out to be really good because it forces me to be instinctual and not to overthink my work too much, which I do a lot. When left to my own devices, I will just scratch at a scab until it bleeds instead of letting it heal. Even this talk, I was locked in my hotel room just like picking at it. It's terrible. So I experiment. Rushing forces me to experiment because you can take a risk. It's just going to be in tomorrow's paper, and then it's in the trash the next day. So when some things work, that's great, and when some things don't work, that's okay too. The stuff that does work jumps out immediately to me. It's really clear when that happens, and I remember those things. I try to remember those and use it for the next assignment. And it's awesome seeing your work at your cafe in New York City. And it's also awesome seeing it in the subway gutter. It really takes you down here. And when your work isn't precious, then it's easier to take risks. So I worked at the Times on and off for, like I said, 6 years. And when I wasn't there, I got a studio, because other people read the New York Times and saw my work, and they thought I was a professional illustrator, and so they hired me to do work as well. And so I needed a place to do that. And so I rented a studio space in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, in a building called the Pencil Factory. And I shared it with a bunch of my friends. There were about 16 of us in a few different rooms. But this is with Josh Cochran, Alex Ebenmeyer, Neil Swab, Pork Chop the dog, and me. And this was great because the Times was just really unpredictable. I never knew when anyone was going to get pregnant. They never told me. So I would find myself working from home for months at a time. And it was very awkward working from home for my interns because I was sad and in my pajamas and filthy. And working in bed when you're at home, it's just bad news. So the Pencil Factory turned out to be the best thing I could have possibly done. Instead of budgeting for a therapist, I paid rent in the studio space. And I worked with other illustrators, and we shared each other's contracts, we shared each other's gripes, we shared beer. It was even though we were slightly competitive, we were a good group of friends. This is Leif Parsons, Jessica Hish, and James Gulliver Hancock. So I went back and forth between the Pencil Factory and the New York Times. And they, despite their better judgment, the Times didn't fire me. They just brought me down into the newsroom, which was actually very, very cool. So instead of being surrounded by art directors, I was surrounded by writers and editors. And instead of asking me to illustrate, let's say like the revolving door of lobbyists on K Street, they wanted me to report on it. And so I tried. I started to work more with writers than art directors. Rather than reading through the rough drafts, I was able to talk directly with the writers and editors, listening how they talk about a particular story, picking up on a phrase that they got excited about, got me excited, and it started to affect my freelance work. Rather than just responding to a brief or responding to a rough draft or responding to a client, I was creating the content as I was designing it. So the words and the art were informing each other rather than responding to one another. This is a little detail. This was for a billboard that was never used, unfortunately. They killed it at the last minute. It was going to be huge, and that's about as large as it will ever be now. So the natural evolution of these complicated stories that are told through graphics and words was to start doing flowcharts, and I made this one a few years ago about Can We Date? And it's about fucking ghosts. You can see a ghost, yeah, so it's pretty, it's just weird. I do work for the man. If you had told me in 2009, 2010, if I was going to take a full-time job, I would have said no. There's no chance. I just got a dog. I really loved the freelance work. And then if you had asked me if I was going to work at a business magazine, I would have said, hell no. There's no way I'll be there. And yeah, here I am. I work at Bloomberg Businessweek now, and we make old rich guys seem kind of cool. For the past year and a half, this is what I've called my desk. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong photo. That's my desk. I work in a very, very fancy building with the incorrigible Richard Turley, who's the creative director, and I manage a small team of graphics editors. And this is the Bloomberg Businessweek art department. Most of them, half of them are photo editors. There's a couple art directors in there, and then there's three of us. See me with the hands next to Kenton Powell and Evan Applegate. That's my graphics team. And like the Times, before I started going full-time at Businessweek, I started as a freelancer, and I was the guest art director for their year-end issue in 2010. And if you had told me that a business magazine would let me run Lady Gaga, Thong Shot, full spread, I would not have believed you. But it turns out you can pretty much connect anything to business in some way or another. So we have a number about beef consumption in America to the right of her, and all the companies that had advertising in their telephone music video to the left of her, and then we had her. And it was very exciting, and you know, when we have the creativity and the freedom to do these kinds of exciting things in a magazine that's usually a little bit stiff, I could not say no to seeing what kind of other work I would do in this magazine. So now I do everything like little charts about Chinese politicians and the crazy telenovela that is their political and personal life. I do giant magenta charts about the GDP. I illustrate on a regular basis. I tried to do a sequential comic once. And even after all the complaints about Lady Gaga's ass, they let me continue to art direct. One of the challenges working at News Weekly is that people feel like they've read everything online already. And the irony, of course, is that nothing happened today is actually in the magazine, but you need to make it feel fresh. So we make efforts to really grab your attention as aggressively and shake you as much as we possibly can. I have to say, I don't have much time for self-reflection, but this talk pretty much forced me to stare at myself in the mirror and think about my career. And I think I thought of my career originally as this linear path. You graduate school, you start junior designer, and all these roles sort of lead up this mythical ladder into the sky where I will retire and be happy and never die. But it turns out that's not how it works at all. These individual roles really need to feed off each other. And at this point, I wish I could think of myself as an art director first and an illustrator or designer second, but I've really acquiesced to all the voices, all three in my head, and it's hard to distinguish one from the other. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It seems a little schizophrenic, but usually it works in my favor. The first assignment I had from Business Week was to do the cover about was why everyone's mortgages were lost and their dream homes were being shredded. And I researched out this computer network that had actually lost all these documents, and it was a pretty heady, complicated story, and so we thought we'd do a really complicated cover. And I had gone 3 days just writing and researching and reporting and put this together and looked at it on Monday, and I was like, wow, this is really bad. This is like a big fuck you to the reader. Like, this doesn't mean anything at all. No one's going to want to pick up this magazine. It just seems like, it's terrible. So after talking with the creative director, we stripped all the graphics that I had done. We threw them on the cover, and we came up with another image. And we went back to our notes, and we had circled the word shredded homes. So it was about thinking that the medium is illustration, but the approach is design. And I was listening too much of myself as a graphics editor and not enough as an art director. And so it's important that when you're doing these multiple roles that you embrace the differences and appreciate the similarities. And because I have no style, it ranges from graphics to illustrations to photographs. I guess my style is really my disposition. And that's trying to use humor to get people to think, to get people to chat. So I made these business cards 2 years ago when I never imagined that I was going to take a full-time job. And when you work for yourself, you can put anything you want on your business card. So I have this obnoxious URL. I guarantee good luck. That email address, I don't even know if I check it really anymore. It's mostly just, it was just something fun to do. I made 3 of them. Not because I had anything really in mind. It was just that I have a commitment problem and I couldn't choose between the 3. So these seem to have been working. I have a whole box of them if you guys want any. So there's a lot. I printed a lot. Now I have a job, so I don't really need them anymore. And so, I mean, I haven't gotten any unicorn business out of it, but I have gotten a lot of designers seem to like them. So for me, the joy of illustration, what I find happiness in, is finding something that no one else seems to have noticed in a very particular way and trying to form that idea into new material. So this was an illustration for the New York Times about commenting online anonymously. I'm far too insecure to create something and share it with anybody and have them look at it in silence, though that happens a lot too. I've come to associate laughter with approval. This particular illustration is about having too many friends on Facebook. And this is also for the New York Times. I've been described as someone who desperately wants you to laugh, and I want to please you. And whoever said that was probably right. But what I also want is respect for my mind, and showing you that I can think that something, then I think that comes from deep-seated feelings of inferiority. But this was an illustration about erotica and pornography. I guess what I'm trying to say is that a joke can suffer if you try to anticipate if someone's going to laugh or not. So I try not to consciously think what is funny. I focus on more well, what is provocative. You know, provocative can help someone, can make people think. Funny just makes people laugh. So hopefully I can do both, and that shock and delight can resonate with people more aggressively. And for other times, people love a good Jewish joke. It ran in the New York Times. So thank you.